You know, there's something deeply paradoxical happening in our world that nobody wants to talk about. The people who seem most awake, most conscious, most aware of life's deeper truths are often the same people who struggle the most with money. It's as if awakening and wealth are somehow incompatible, as if you must choose between consciousness and prosperity. I've watched it happen again and again. Someone has a spiritual awakening. They begin to see through the illusions of society. They start questioning everything they were taught about success and ambition and purpose. And then, almost inevitably, their financial situation begins to deteriorate, not because they're lazy or incompetent, but because something fundamental has shifted in how they relate to the world. Alan Watts understood this phenomenon deeply. He recognized that when you wake up from the cultural trance, when you stop sleepwalking through life, you also stop playing the games that society rewards with money. And this creates a real problem because you still need to eat. You still need shelter. You still live in a world that runs on currency. By the end of this lesson, you'll understand the four real reasons spiritually awakened people struggle with money. Not so you can judge yourself or feel guilty, but so you can see clearly what's actually happening. Because once you see it, you can make a conscious choice about what to do next. And here's what most people miss. This struggle isn't a sign that you're doing something wrong. It's a sign that you're seeing something right. The question is, what do you do with that sight? Let's begin with the most fundamental reason. And this one, once you see it, you cannot unsee it. The first reason spiritually awake people struggle with money is simple but profound. You see through the game. And once you see through it, you can no longer play it with full conviction. Think about what most high-paying work actually requires. It requires you to care deeply about things that don't really matter. It requires you to get excited about quarterly profits and market share and beating the competition. It requires you to treat artificial deadlines as life or death situations. It requires you to participate in corporate theater and pretend it's meaningful. Before awakening, you could do this. You could convince yourself that the presentation really was important, that the client really did need to be impressed, that climbing the ladder really was the point. But after awakening, you can't. You see it for what it is. Theater, a game of pretend where everyone has agreed to act as if these things matter tremendously. And here's the problem. The people who make the most money are the people who can play this game with absolute sincerity. They're not pretending to care about the Q4 projections. They actually do care. They lie awake at night thinking about market positioning. They get genuinely upset when a competitor gains an advantage. Their entire nervous system is invested in the game. But you're sitting in the meeting thinking about how strange it is that grown adults are this emotionally involved in selling slightly different versions of the same product. You're watching everyone perform urgency and importance, and you can see the performance. You can see that none of this will matter in 5 years, let alone 500. This doesn't make you better than them. It just makes you different. And that difference has a price. I knew a man once who worked as a senior executive at a pharmaceutical company. He was good at his job, made excellent money, respected in his field. Then he had what he described as a sudden awakening. Nothing dramatic. He was sitting in a strategy meeting, and suddenly the entire scene looked absurd to him. All these intelligent people deeply invested in a game that in the grand scheme of existence meant absolutely nothing. He tried to go back to normal, tried to reinvest in the game, but he couldn't. Once you see the theater, you can't unsee it. Within a year, he had left the company. Within 2 years, he was making a fraction of what he used to make. But when I asked him if he regretted it, he said something I'll never forget. He said, "I can't afford my old life anymore, but I also can't afford to go back to sleep." This is the first trap. Awakening shows you that most of what we call important work isn't actually important. And once you see that, you lose the ability to fake the enthusiasm that makes people want to pay you. The second reason runs even deeper, and it has to do with a fundamental shift in values that happens after awakening. You begin to value time over money, and in a society that's built on trading time for money, this shift is catastrophic to your finances. Before awakening, you could work 60-hour weeks. You could sacrifice your evenings and weekends. You could delay gratification indefinitely because you believed in the future payoff. More money meant a better life, so trading your finite time for infinite accumulation made sense. But after awakening, something changes. You realize that time is the only thing you actually have. Money is an abstraction. A future reward is a promise. But this moment, right now, is real, and you're never getting it back. So you start making different choices. You turn down the promotion that requires more hours. You refuse to check email on weekends. You leave work at 5 because you'd rather watch the sunset than earn overtime. And every time you make this choice, you fall further behind financially compared to those who haven't had this realization. Society calls this lazy. It calls it lacking ambition. It calls it not wanting it bad enough. But that's not what's happening. What's happening is you've remembered something that our culture desperately wants you to forget. You've remembered that you're going to die, that all of this is temporary, that the only real wealth is the richness of your experience in each passing moment. Watts would ask, what's the point of spending your entire life climbing a ladder only to discover at the top that it was leaning against the wrong wall? What's the point of accumulating money you never have time to enjoy? What's the point of winning a game that costs you your actual life? But here's the uncomfortable truth. This realization doesn't pay rent. The landlord doesn't accept presence and mindfulness as currency. The grocery store doesn't take moments of peace in exchange for food. So you find yourself in this impossible position. You've woken up to what actually matters, but you still live in a world that only rewards what doesn't. And this is where many awakened people get stuck. They're too conscious to play the old game, but not yet skillful enough to create a new one. So they struggle, not because they're failures, but because they're between worlds. The third reason is perhaps the most painful because it involves watching opportunities pass you by, knowing exactly why you're letting them pass. After awakening, you become intolerant of compromise. You can no longer participate in systems you recognize as harmful. You can no longer work for companies whose values contradict your own. You can no longer do work that requires you to manipulate or deceive people, even if that manipulation is standard business practice. Before awakening, you could rationalize this. Everyone has to make compromises, you'd tell yourself. That's just how the world works. It's not personal, it's business. I'm just doing my job. These rationalizations allowed you to participate in systems you didn't fully believe in, and those systems paid you well for your participation. But after awakening, those rationalizations stop working. You see too clearly. When your company asks you to use manipulative marketing tactics, you see the manipulation. When your boss asks you to prioritize profit over people, you see the harm. When the culture rewards aggressive competition over cooperation, you see the violence. And you can't do it anymore. You just can't. Your conscience won't let you. Your awareness won't let you. So you say no. You set boundaries. You refuse to participate. And every time you do, you eliminate another potential source of income. I remember hearing about a lawyer who left a prestigious firm because she realized most of her work was helping wealthy clients avoid accountability for harm they'd caused. The money was incredible. The prestige was real, but she couldn't stomach it anymore. She couldn't spend her days using her intelligence to help people escape consequences. So she left, started doing legal aid work, helping people who actually needed help. And she went from making six figures to barely making ends meet. When people asked if she regretted it, she said, I regret that these are the only two options. But between helping the powerful harm the weak and being poor, I choose poor. This is what I call the integrity tax. It's the financial price you pay for refusing to compromise your values. And awakened people pay this tax constantly because they can't unsee what they see. They can't unknow what they know. Society will tell you this is foolish, that you're being naive, that everyone has to make compromises, that you're letting perfect be the enemy of good. But what society is really saying is, shut up and take the money. Ignore what you know. Go back to sleep. And for awakened people, that's no longer possible. The fourth reason is perhaps the subtlest, but it's devastating in its effects. After awakening, you begin operating on a different frequency than the people who control the flow of money. Money in our society flows through networks. It flows through connections and relationships and who you know. It flows through ambitious people who are all climbing the same ladder, helping each other up, making deals, creating opportunities. It flows through a kind of collective energy that says, we're all in this together. We're all trying to get ahead. Let's help each other succeed. But when you wake up, you often withdraw from these networks. You can't relate to the conversations anymore. You can't pretend to care about market trends and investment strategies and getting ahead. You can't network with the hungry intensity that networking requires. You can't play the game of mutually beneficial relationships where everyone is constantly calculating value and advantage. So you drift away, you spend more time alone, you find yourself unable to tolerate the social environments where deals get made and opportunities emerge. You become, in a very real sense, disconnected from the flow of money. And here's what nobody tells you. Talent and hard work are not the primary determinants of financial success. Connection is. Being in the right networks with the right people at the right time is how most significant money is made. But awakened people often find themselves unable or unwilling to maintain those connections. Not because they're antisocial or difficult, but because the conversations feel hollow, because the relationships feel transactional, because the entire energy of ambition and competition and getting ahead feels incompatible with the peace they've found. I knew someone who worked in venture capital. His entire job was networking, connecting with ambitious founders, identifying the next big thing. He was good at it, made a fortune. Then he had what he described as a dark night of the soul. He realized he'd spent years only forming relationships with people who could advance his interests. Every friendship was strategic. Every conversation was calculated. So he stopped. He withdrew from the networking events in the startup scene and the whole ecosystem of ambitious people using each other to get ahead. And his income collapsed. Not because he lost his skills, but because he lost access to the networks where money flows. He told me once, I used to think I was successful because I was smart and hardworking. Then I stepped out of the network and realized I was successful because I was connected. Without the network, I'm just another person with ideas nobody's listening to. This is the loneliness tax of awakening, the withdrawal from collective ambition, and it has real financial consequences. So here we are. 4 reasons why awakened people struggle with money. You see through the game and can't play it anymore. You value time over money in a culture that demands the opposite. You refuse to compromise your integrity for income. And you operate on a different frequency than the networks where money flows. It sounds hopeless, doesn't it? It sounds like awakening is a curse, a guarantee of poverty, a sentence to financial struggle. And I won't lie to you, for many people, that's exactly what it feels like. But here's where Alan Watts would challenge everything I've just said. Here's where the real wisdom begins. Watts would tell you that the struggle isn't with money itself. The struggle is with your relationship to money. You've rejected society's obsession with wealth, which is good. But in rejecting the obsession, you may have also rejected money as a form of energy you can work with. You see, money isn't evil. Money is neutral. It's energy. It's a medium of exchange. It's a tool. What's corrupted isn't money. What's corrupted is our attachment to it, our fear of losing it, our belief that having it makes us valuable and not having it makes us worthless. Before awakening, you chased money because you thought it would complete you. You thought it would make you safe, respected, worthy. That's the trap. That's the attachment. After awakening, you rejected money because you associated it with that trap. But in doing so, you may have created a new trap. The trap of believing that being poor makes you more spiritual. Watts would say this is nonsense. Complete nonsense. Being poor doesn't make you enlightened any more than being rich makes you enlightened. The question isn't how much money you have. The question is, can you have money without being possessed by it? Can you work without being enslaved to work? Can you create value without compromising your values? And the answer is yes. But it requires something most people haven't considered. It requires you to stop trying to succeed in the old game and start creating a new one. The old game says trade your time for money, climb the ladder, compete for scarce resources, compromise as needed, accumulate as much as you can. That game is designed for unconscious people. It rewards ambition over awareness, aggression over compassion, speed over wisdom. But there's another game, a game where you create value from consciousness rather than ego, where you serve rather than sell, where you offer what's genuinely helpful rather than what's maximally profitable, where you work with people rather than manipulating them. This game is harder to play because fewer people understand its rules. But it's the only game awakened people can play with integrity. And here's what Watts understood that most miss. When you play this game well, money comes. Not because you're chasing it, but because you're creating real value that people genuinely need. The awakened entrepreneur doesn't ask, what can I sell to make the most money? They ask, what do people actually need that I can provide? The awakened worker doesn't ask, how do I climb fastest? They ask, how do I contribute most meaningfully? The awakened creator doesn't ask, what's trending? They ask, what's true? And paradoxically, this approach can lead to greater prosperity than the aggressive pursuit of wealth ever could. Not because you're trying to get rich, but because you're aligned with something real. And people are starving for what's real. Let me be clear. I'm not promising you that awakening will make you wealthy. I'm not selling some prosperity gospel dressed in spiritual language. What I'm saying is this. The struggle you're experiencing isn't a life sentence. It's a transition. You've left the old game, but haven't yet fully entered the new one. You're between worlds. And in this between space, you have a choice. You can resent money, reject it, tell yourself that poverty is more spiritual. Or you can recognize money as neutral energy and ask yourself, how can I work with this energy from a place of consciousness rather than fear? You can ask, what would I do if money weren't the primary concern? And then, how could I do that in a way that also generates income? Not by compromising, but by being more creative, more patient, more willing to build something slowly that actually matters. The awakened person who struggles financially isn't failing at money. They're succeeding at consciousness. And that's no small thing. But consciousness and prosperity are not enemies. They're not opposites. They're not mutually exclusive. You can be awake and financially secure. You can be conscious and professionally successful. You can see through society's illusions and still participate in the economy. But you have to do it differently. You have to find the third way. The way that honors both your awakening and your need to survive. Watts spent his life doing exactly this. He saw through the game. He valued depth over ambition. He refused to compromise his message. And he created a livelihood by sharing what he genuinely understood, not by manipulating people into buying things they didn't need, but by offering wisdom to people who were ready for it. That's the model. Not chasing money, not rejecting money, but allowing money to flow toward you as a natural consequence of being genuinely helpful to others, of creating from consciousness, of serving rather than selling. This won't happen overnight. The transition from the old game to the new one takes time. It requires patience and creativity, and often a willingness to live simply while you figure it out. But it's possible. It's real. And it's the only path that allows you to remain awake while also remaining financially viable. So if you're spiritually awake and struggling with money, hear this. You're not doing it wrong. You're in transition. You've rejected a game that was making you sick, and you haven't yet fully discovered the game that will allow you to thrive. That's not failure. That's courage. Keep going. Keep exploring. Keep asking how you can create value from consciousness. Keep refusing to compromise your integrity. Keep honoring both your awakening and your practical needs. The answer exists. The path exists. It's just not the path everyone else is walking. And maybe that's exactly as it should be. Maybe the awakened person's relationship with money is meant to be different. Not because poverty is virtuous, but because consciousness requires us to find new ways of participating in the world. Ways that honor both spirit and matter, both awareness and survival, both truth and practicality. That's the real teaching, not that money is evil or that poverty is holy, but that you can navigate this material world with consciousness, creating prosperity without losing your soul. That's the challenge. That's the opportunity. That's what Watts would tell you. You're not failing. You're pioneering. And the path you're carving, the one where consciousness and prosperity coexist, that's the path the world desperately needs more people to walk. So keep walking it with patience, with creativity, with the understanding that you're not just trying to make money, you're trying to make a life that's actually worth living. And in the end, that's the only wealth that really matters.